We're going to be in Proverbs chapter 1 this morning. Proverbs chapter 1. I'm going to read the first 7 verses. It says, "The Proverbs of Solomon, the son of David, king of Israel, to know wisdom and instruction, to perceive the words of understanding, to receive the instruction of wisdom, justice and judgment and equity, to give subtlety to the simple, to the young man knowledge and discretion. A wise man will hear and will increase learning, and a man of understanding shall attain unto the wise counsels. To understand a proverb and the interpretation, the words of the wise and their dark sayings. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge, but fools despise wisdom and instruction." You know, the world that we live in is obsessed with self-help, right? You go to a library or a bookstore or whatever, and there's a great big section of self-help books, and we can find out how to improve every part of our lives. There's somebody wrote a book on it. It's there. It goes beyond that. There's TV programs, you know, Dr. Phil, is that what it is? Dr. Phil and Dr. Oz and those type programs on TV, they're telling you how you can improve your life, how you can improve your relationships, how you can do all those type things. So we have all sorts of things out there that will help us succeed or help us to begin to change our direction in our life. And Solomon here wrote the first one. He gave us a book here of Proverbs that give us direction, give us some help, self-helps for our lives. And as you look at those things and look at the books that are out there and Solomon's words here, you know, Solomon here gives his words in Proverbs. And in the world, a lot of times they come through in Proverbs and in riddles as they're giving us little tidbits of information and little things that might help us as we go through life. And as I was studying and going through this, I found a few that I thought were sort of cute, so we may look at them just a second this morning. And the first one here, it says, "Men are from earth, women are from earth, deal with it." You know, they always say men are from earth and women are from Venus or something, but both of us are from earth, deal with it. "Give a man a fish and he'll eat for a day. Teach a man to fish and he'll float around in his boat all day." And if all the world is a stage, where's the audience sitting? If you try to fail and succeed, which have you done? Failed or succeeded? Why do we drive on a parkway and park on a driveway? This is just some of the world's wisdoms that we hear out there and look at, and I don't know that any of them's helpful. Most of them's useless, right? But Solomon has some good helpful stuff for us here. You know, if you've ever in your life had to deal with any of life's problems, if you've had a difficult boss, if you've had to deal with the in-laws or kids as they grow up and become teenagers, had difficulties in your marriage, had financial decisions you needed to take care of, if you were wrestling with pride or greed or impatience, laziness, jealousy, the bottle, then this book right here is for you. Solomon has all kinds of good insights for us and all kinds of practical helps for our daily life. And he's trying to help us here, and look at this as we go through. The first thing is we notice is who this is from. We know it's from Solomon, and then he tells us what this book of Proverbs is for. He tells us here in verse 2, he says, "To know wisdom and instruction, and to perceive the words of understanding." He's telling us what he's laying out here before us. You know, the Bible tells us that God made Solomon the wisest man that's ever lived. So he had a lot of knowledge that he could deliver, a lot of knowledge that he could help us in our daily lives, give us some instruction and give us some direction. So he was able to help us there in our daily lives if we'll just follow this instruction and follow these things as we go through. He gives us, if you look down through those verses, he tells us what he's going to deliver. He says there's wisdom, there's instruction, there's insight, there's prudence, there's knowledge, there's discretion, There's guidance. You know, He gives us everything that we need to be able to live a Christian life, to be able to live a prosperous and a life that glorifies God in this world as we go through. He's trying to help us. You know, when I was growing up, my dad gave me some great helps as I grew up. The problem was I didn't listen to those things most of the time. My dad would tell me when I was growing up, he said, my words go, you know, he said they go in one ear, but they go out about as fast as they went in. You know, he knew that I didn't listen too well. I wish I had in a lot of instances. And a lot of those things I still remember. You know, you know how words sometimes come back to haunt you? You get in a situation and you think, uh-oh, he told me that this is going to happen if I wasn't careful, or these things were going to happen, or whatever it may be. That's the way I think about things now. My dad's a very wise man, and he helped me out. Solomon here is trying to do the same thing for us. He's trying to help us as we go through. His intention is to instruct us in wise dealings and in justice in the world, and equality and in righteousness as we go through. He's trying to help us have those characteristics as we go through life and be able to live a life that is pleasing and prosperous in this world to God. In verse 4 there he says, to give subtlety to the simple, to the young man knowledge and discretion. A wise man will hear and will increase in learning, and a man of understanding shall attain unto wise counsel. So he tells us who this is for. You know, he's telling us it's for the young folks. You know, for our preteens and teens and young men and women as they're going through their younger years. It's to help them, to instruct them, to give them knowledge, to help them understand how the world works. But he didn't stop there. He went on in verse 5 and he says that a wise man will hear. You know, it's not just for the young, it's for each and every one of us. Solomon wants each one of us to obtain this and to have it in our lives, to envelop it and live these things as we go through life. To have these things in our life that we're able to please Him and live for Him, live for God in all the things that we do, in all the things that we're trying to do in this world. And as he delivers these instructions, delivers these things to us, telling us what his desire is, Solomon is a wise man. In verse 7 he tells us where it all begins. In verse 7 he says, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. Solomon knew exactly where it all began. And he tells us that if we don't desire that, he says, but fools despise wisdom and instruction. You know, a lot of folks turn their back on God's wisdom and instruction, but he tells us that the beginning, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. You know, when I came to the Lord, when I gave my heart and life to the Lord, I began to understand the things that God had in store, and I began to understand the wisdom that He delivered to us in this world. You know, a lot of times we go through this life and we are listening to the traditional wisdom of the world, man's wisdom. We see those things delivered and portrayed in the world that we live. People will instill their knowledge, and you get this sort of mindset that tells us, well, it must be okay because everybody's doing it. You know, I ought to be able to be included because I need to look like or act like or live like this because that's the norm. Well, that's not the traditional wisdom that Solomon is trying to deliver. He's trying to help us understand that it's something different, that it's the knowledge from God is what we need in our lives. And it begins with that fear of God. Now, when we hear that word fear, what's the first thing that comes to our mind? When we think about fear, you know, in my mind, I think a lot of times about storms. You know, and I'm not real smart, I guess. I don't fear storms the way I probably should. But when we're having a big lightning storm or things of this nature, sometimes I'll go to the window and just watch because I'm in awe of God's power. You know, to see the lightning flash and to see the wind blow and the trees shake and all those different things, I'm in awe of God's power. You know, that word fear, that's exactly what it's meaning, is to be in awe of God. It's not saying that we ought to crouch behind our couch or whatever and be totally afraid of God. It's to have a healthy respect for God is what He's telling us we need to have. And when those storms are around, I tend to sort of do that. I remember when the tornado come up through here. And I went out on the porch, several of us went out on the porch, and we watched that storm go through the neighborhood just right up above us. I guess maybe I wasn't smart enough to know I should have went to the basement and hid. But I watched that, and I was in awe as I saw that go up through there. The swirling of the storm and the things that God had created, and in my mind I was thinking how amazing this God is that we serve, that He controls all these different aspects of nature. And that's what Solomon is telling us here, that we need to have the fear of the Lord. We need to be in awe. We need to have a good, healthy respect for God and understand who He is and what He can do in all aspects of life. Not just nature, but in our lives too. How we can change and help and direct and guide and heal and touch. All the things that God can do. We need to be in awe of all those things. Solomon here, as I said, he was the wisest man, the Bible tells us, that was ever on the earth. And he knew that there was something greater, didn't he? And he points us to that something greater here in this verse. Solomon could have said, hey, I'm the wisest that's ever been. I know all. I have understood all, and you all just follow me. But he didn't say that. He understood that where he got this knowledge was from God. He understood that the fear of God, the awe of God, the understanding of God was where he got this knowledge. And we need to understand that too. And when we do that, it points to the wisdom, the source of this knowledge. It anchors our motives and it humbles our hearts when we begin to think about who God is and what God can do and what God has done in our lives. Solomon knew that. He knew that there was one greater. In Luke chapter 11, verse 31, Jesus here says, the queen of the south shall rise up in the judgment with the men of this generation and condemn them. For she came from the utmost parts of the earth to hear the wisdom of Solomon. And behold, a greater than Solomon is here. That's Jesus' words. And he's telling the people, Solomon was great, and the queen of Sheba was going to rise up. But there was somebody there greater than Solomon. Somebody wiser than Solomon. He was right there in front of them. We need to realize that in our lives as we go through. In Colossians chapter 1:9, Paul here, as he's dealing with the church of Colossae, he tells them there in verse 9 of chapter 1, he says, for this cause we also, since the day we heard it, do not cease to pray for you, and to desire that you might be filled with the knowledge of His will and all wisdom and spiritual understanding. Paul knew that we needed to have wisdom and understanding of God. The wisdom in this world is not what's going to direct us or guide us or get us to heaven. It's only the knowledge of God and coming to know Him and coming to live for Him and allow Him to have His way in our lives, to allow Him to save us and put that shed blood from Calvary upon us. Solomon understood that. And he's trying to deliver those messages to that church here. In chapter 3, verse 16, he says, let the word of Christ dwell in you richly in all wisdom, teaching and admonishing one another in psalms and hymns and spiritual songs, singing with grace in your hearts to the Lord. He's telling us here that we need to allow God's wisdom to fill us. The only way to do that is to come to know God and then to spend time with God and spend time in God's Word. We have to allow Him to fill us. We have to allow Him to indwell us. We have to allow Him to give us that wisdom and teaching that He wants us to follow. And then we have to be willing to follow that, don't we? My dad gave me that, as I said. He gave me direction. He gave me wisdom. He gave me teachings. But a lot of times I wasn't willing to follow it. I wish I had now. As I look back, I wish I had in my life. It would have saved me a lot of trouble. If we follow God, it's going to be the same. He's going to give us the wisdoms of how to navigate this world, how to keep us from the temptations that this world presents to us, how to deliver us from that evil that's out there. But it's only through His words and His teaching and His wisdom. We need to be able to adhere to that and come to that, don't we, in our lives. Solomon here, as you look at chapter 3, verse 5, he tells us, he says, "Trust in the Lord with all thine heart, and lean not unto thine own understanding. In all thy ways acknowledge him, and he shall direct thy paths." Solomon here tells us exactly what we need to do in life. He said, trust in the Lord. Lean not unto yourself, not into this world, not into the neighbor or your best friend or whoever it may be, because all those folks can let us down at times. All those things can have the wrong intentions for our life. But God never does. We need to lean ourselves toward God. We need to trust in God. Trust in His knowledge. Trust in His wisdom. Trust in His direction. And then He says, in all thy ways acknowledge Him, and He'll direct thy paths. You know, I found in my life when I'm walking the path that God's laid out before me, it's a lot better path than I ever chose. And I'm thankful for that. But we have to yield ourselves to Him, because guess what self wants to do? It wants to be in control. It wants to lead its own life, lead its own path. That's the way we are. We were having a conversation last night, and I got to thinking about that conversation. You know, we were talking about where we worked or who we were working for, and I got to thinking, you know, I'd like to work for self. I'd like to do my own thing. That way I could make my own choices. If I wanted to get up early and go out and do something, I could. If I wanted to lay in the bed a little longer, then I could. You know, if I worked for somebody else. I can't do that. I have to be there when they tell me to be there. I have to do what they tell me to do. We sometimes desire that in our lives, don't we? And we have to go against our nature, that sinful human nature, to desire to do the things of God. Because sometimes God gives us direction and gives us things to do that we're not all that thrilled about. We'll try to bargain with Him. We'll try to make excuses why we can't. We'll do all sorts of things. And we can see that through the Bible. Moses was a prime example, as he said, as God came to him and said, I want you to go to the Israelites. And he said, they're not going to believe me. Who are they going to think I come from? And then when he took care of that, he said, I can't talk. You know, I'm not a very eloquent speaker, so they're not going to listen. You know, he came up with excuse after excuse after excuse, and God just kept telling him, I'll take care of those things. You know, we're the same way. We'll come up with an excuse. God will say, I'll take care of it. But this. And then we try to bargain, you know, Lord, well, if you'll just do this, then I'll do that. We try to do those things, don't we? Solomon here knew if we just turn it over to God, if we turn our lives over to God, He's got something so much better, so much greater in store for us. So I have to ask you this morning, have you turned your life over to God? Have you given your life to Him? Are you following Him totally and completely today? Have you allowed Him to indwell you? Have you allowed Him to fill you? And are you doing what it is that He desires for you in this life? You following His direction? You living a life that's pleasing to Him? Well, you see, the only way you're going to be happy in this world, the only way you're going to have joy in your life in this world. Now, don't get me wrong, the world will give us temporary happiness. Temporary. You know, we can go get a new car, and we're temporarily happy till we get the first car payment, right? And then that happiness is gone. Because now we come to the realization that we have to pay for it. It'll give us temporary happiness. But God gives us perpetual joy. Never goes away, no matter what situation, no matter what circumstance in life, no matter where we are or what we're going through, God has the answers. If we'll just trust Him and follow Him. Are you doing that today? If you would stand with me.
Page 340.